Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman Monday launched the National Monetization Pipeline.
This entire pipeline, National Monetization Pipeline, is talking about brownfield assets where investment has already been made, where there is a completed asset which is either languishing or which is remaining not fully monetized or which is remaining underutilized. So by bringing in the private participation into this, you're going to be able to monetize it better, and with whatever resource that you're having obtained through the monetization, you're able to put in further investment into infrastructure building.
Economy does not lie in sparing money, but spending it wisely. Starting on this note, our today's report is on National Monetization Pipeline, a key initiative by Government of India. National Monetization Pipeline is a brownfield asset monetization program by Niti Aayog and Finance Ministry of India, launched on 23rd August 2021 by the Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. It is a kind of fundraiser program which aims to generate $81 billion by leasing out state-owned brownfield infrastructural assets over the next 4 years. Brownfield assets are those where the investments are already made, but either they are underdeveloped, undermonetized, or languishing. This pipeline would not only help the government to improve the brownfield assets, but also help in creation of new greenfield assets, because now the government would be able to pull out the investments from non-yielding and use them to develop infrastructure and beneficial assets for the economic growth. This could take place by bringing in private players to make investments in underutilized assets and granting them rights of operations, management and development of these through OMDA model. Talking about the key objectives of this program, apart from providing a medium-term roadmap for the line ministries and agencies and medium-term visibility to investors on infrastructure assets pipeline, it would also provide a platform for ministries to track asset performance, bring in greater efficiency and transparency in public assets management, create infrastructure by structured partnership and monetization, create employment opportunities, integrate rural and semi-urban areas, and ensure social economic growth and public welfare. So now about the sectors to be monetized. The government has identified 13 sectors under central ministries which would be monetized through public-private partnership over a period of 4 years. These sectors are roads, railways, ports, aviation, stadiums, warehousing, telecom, urban real estate, mining, power transmission, power generation, natural gas pipeline, and product pipelines. Some of these identified sectors such as railways, roads, power, telecom, etc. has already witnessed public-private partnership in the past few years and would continue to do so over the next 4 years. Talking about the key imperatives of the NMP program, the first is the monetization of rights and ownership with mandatory handback of assets at the end of transaction life. Second is selection of de-risked and brownfield assets with stable revenue generation profile or long-term revenue rights that can clearly be ring-fenced or guaranteed that the funds allocated for the purpose will not be spent on anything else. And third, monetization should be viewed as structured contractual partnerships and not privatization or slump sale of assets. Well-defined contractual frameworks should be adopted which allow government authorities to have clearly laid down KPIs or key performance indicators and standards for assets. Now our question is, how will the program unfold? The process of monetization of assets will take place over a span of 4 years. In terms of annual phasing by value, 15% of assets with an indicative value of 0.88 lakh crore were envisaged to be rolled out in the financial year 21-22. Considering that infrastructure creation is inevitably linked to monetization, the period for NMP has been decided so as to be coterminous with the balance period under National Infrastructure Pipeline (NIP). The plan is in line with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's strategic disinvestment policy, under which the government will retain presence in only a few identified areas, with the rest tapping the private sector. So, after understanding the National Monetization Pipeline program in detail, let's move on to a Q&A section with our esteemed and honorable speaker, Professor V. Acharya, the former Deputy Governor at RBI and an advisor to Federal Reserve Banks of New York and Philadelphia. What are your opinions on the program? And are the criticisms such as government is selling country's assets right and justified?
Hi, this is Professor Viral Acharya from New York University Stern School of Business. I'm going to answer the 5 questions that were posed to me on the National Monetization Pipeline. Question 1 concerned what are my overall views on monetization of the government assets. The government of India runs a very high fiscal deficit. This is not sort of uncommon for the government of India given its past trajectory. However, the present levels have risen quite substantially in the last 5 years, and then there has been the COVID shock. The debt to GDP ratio for the government of India is also quite high, approaching between 80 to 90%, and it can be brought down to more sustainable levels only if the growth in the economy is very large. Monetization of the government assets has to be thought of in the context of this broader government financing. Going to the markets and borrowing more and more, or asking banks to purchase more and more of government bonds are not good options, because that means the debt savings of the economy are essentially hogged by the government and not available at reasonable costs of borrowing to individuals and the private sector companies. Besides, if government keeps raising more and more debt, that puts pressure on the revenues because they have to be generated in the short term to make the repayments. That can lead to debt rollover problems. That can become a source of financial fragility for the country and the government. But it can also force the government to take very short-term policies because it has to generate quick cash flows to repay the debt. A better way out is to actually simply sell your assets. Government of India sits on a large number of assets in the form of government-owned companies in a variety of sectors. These companies themselves own a huge amount of real estate all over the country. Take a drive through any city of India and just look around at the billboards. A large part of real estate in India is actually owned by these government-owned companies. These assets can be monetized. That would mean raising equity financing in many cases, because you may not sell the asset entirely. The government may sell its assets in part. But this is clearly the most important way that the government can reduce its deficits. It can reduce its debt borrowing and be on a more sustainable borrowing and financing road.
Do you think the NMP program is aligned with sustainable development goals such as decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, or partnerships for goals, and would prove to be helpful in achieving these goals?
Let us now come to the second question, which is on whether the National Monetization Pipeline is consistent with sustainable development goals. At some level, there is no direct connection between these two. A government-owned company can be doing sustainable business, so can a private company do it, or they could both not be doing it. However, there is one important thing to keep in mind, which is that a number of government-owned enterprises in India run at very low levels of efficiency, which means that they are not very productive. They use too much input for generating exactly the same output as a comparable private company on average. So if you can sell the government stakes to private operators who on average have been shown in economic history to run assets better once the government cedes control, which is that it gives more than 51% ownership to the private sector so that they can make the management decisions, then that improved efficiency and productivity would mean less inputs needed for the same output. And of course, that would overall be better for sustainable development.
The COVID 19 pandemic has severely affected many sectors of the economy. Do you think this pipeline could prove to be an opportunity for the private sector players and enterprises to revive from economic trauma and get a new start?
Coming to question 3, can national monetization be a way for the economy to revive itself post-COVID? Absolutely. As I answered in response to question 1, it will put the government financing and borrowing on a more sustainable path. But if efficiency gains can be unlocked by transferring ownership of these companies as well as their management control to the private sector, then many government-owned enterprises and sectors where government's presence is very large can actually be converted into more efficient enterprises. That would create value for the private sector. There's another interesting angle to it, which is that the sale of these stakes may also attract interest of foreign investors. Some of this may be good for India, especially in the current environment where the Federal Reserve in the United States is tightening its monetary policy, normalizing its COVID pandemic resolution packages, and inflows of foreign capital in such a time could also be stable for the Indian rupee, and that would also keep India a bit on a sounder footing as far as external sector fragility is concerned.
The assets listed for monetization are from different sectors, and some of the crucial sectors such as railways, roads, power supply, or natural gas pipelines occupy major share. What, in your opinion, could be the possible impact of this on various sections of the society?
The fourth question then is, there are several sectors in which national monetization is planned. Who are likely to be the beneficiaries and who is likely to bear the costs? Note that the huge presence of government in a large part of India's industries means that there are a lot of public sector jobs in India. In my view, these are relatively low quality jobs. These companies are not operating at the cutting edge. They are not operating at the production frontiers of their respective sectors when you compare them to other private companies in India, or especially if you compare them to their global competitors. Unfortunately, those who have these jobs, which is the labor in these companies, of course, sees them as a source of great stability. But is that good for India as a whole? Having a huge number of low quality jobs with extremely talented human capital. Why would that be good for the country in the long run? That's a question we have to ask. Of course, with like any privatization, ultimately there will be some labor related issues, disputes, opposition. But I think if a combination of voluntary retirement schemes, sort of guaranteed jobs for a few years before the private companies who take over the management can reshuffle the labor, or maybe even few years might be too much, but some sort of transition path can be offered to the employees. It may make the privatization easier. I would also say that what makes privatization easier, if the company's trajectory once it is privatized has greater clarity. If it is sold to the right buyer, if there's conviction that the management will turn the company around, then this can be of tremendous value to the labor itself. The beneficiaries, we've already discussed, the government would be a huge beneficiary, the private sector would be a huge beneficiary. But as I just explained, in my view, even the Indian labor will be a huge beneficiary in the long run. There's a subtle point here, which is that many of these enterprises are loss-making. The taxpayers are footing the bill. Who are the taxpayers? It is actually you and I. And so in that sense, the common man, the taxpayer, will also benefit if less money of the taxes the government collects is going down the drain, and more of it can actually be used to do infrastructure, health, education, bandwidth provision all over.
Lastly, do you think involving private sector may lead to commercialization of these crucial sectors?
Last question that was asked to me was relating to whether there will be a commercialization of these sectors that are presently significantly owned by the government. Yes, indeed. But commercialization need not be viewed as a negative. It could mean a professionalization of these sectors. Take the banking sector, for example. There is a big demand for improvement in the provision of banking services from the public sector banks. The risk management could improve, their use of technology could improve, their digital footprint could improve. All of this would be a win-win for the common man if the privatization is done right, if it leads to the right risk management, better human capital hiring decisions, better incentives for human capital to perform well and take the company higher and higher in terms of its excellence. So I think the government of India has embarked on an ambitious monetization plan. I think it's the need of the hour. Perhaps it has been the need of the hour for more than a decade now. I'm glad that it's finally on the table. If done right, it can unlock a lot of productivity. It can stabilize government finances, and it can also help India become more stable on the external sector. Thank you very much.
Finally, concluding the dialogue on national monetization policy with few of the recent updates, certain core infrastructure assets of the selected PSUs are identified under NMP. The PSUs whose infrastructure assets have been identified for monetization include NHAI, AAI, PGCIL, NTPC, JIL, IOCL, etc. Around 25 Airports Authority of India (AAI) airports have been earmarked by the Centre for Asset Monetization over the next 3 years under the NMP. These airports include Bhubaneswar, Varanasi, Amritsar, Raipur, Calicut, Nagpur, Madurai, Ranchi, etc. The Department of Investment and Public Asset Management (DPAM) has invited bids on the MSTC portal for 6 properties of BSNL and MTNL, kickstarting the non-core asset monetization of the 2 struggling telecom PSUs. The 2 companies have failed to show any credible turnout despite being given a massive ₹70,000 crore revival package sometime back and own massive land assets across the country worth thousands of crores.